Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Some breaking news in the last hour. The government has announced that it will trigger Article 50 on Wednesday, the 29th of March. Well, let's get the latest from our political correspondent, Vicky Young. So, what's going to happen?
Well, it seems quite a long time since that EU referendum back in June, but Theresa May always said that she wanted to trigger Article 50 by the end of March, and she is going to do that. So after Prime Minister's questions next week, she will make a statement to the House of Commons, and then she formally sends off a letter to Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council. So that is what happens. Of course, many other questions then about the negotiations themselves. It means that there's a 2-year clock ticking before the UK leaves the European Union, and in that time both sides will try to get a deal. Now, what it involves, of course, is open to some speculation, but I think at this point Theresa May getting her way, fulfilling the timetable she said she would, despite some bumps along the way. The Supreme Court, of course, made the government bring in a bill. It went through Parliament. There were some changes made by the Lords, but in the end she will be getting her way and triggering Article 50 by next Wednesday.
Now, you mentioned the letter that she will send off to the European Union. Take us through a little bit of the process that will then happen on the European Union side. We've already had actually some words drop saying that they are ready, the Commission, ready to begin the Brexit negotiations, because both sides will want to say they're the ones in control.
Absolutely. Until now, really, Theresa May has been in charge of the timetable, but as soon as she sends that letter off, in many ways the attention turns to Brussels. Now, Donald Tusk has said that they may be ready to give some response to that letter within 48 hours or so. It will be the European Union Council who gives really a negotiating mandate to the Commission to set forward their priorities. So we will get to know a little bit more about the priorities, I think, on both sides. Both sides have talked about things like the rights of EU citizens living in the UK, Brits living abroad. Both have said that's a priority, but there are some other things they do not agree on. The so-called divorce bill, for example. Will Theresa May be handed a huge bill saying this is what the UK owes, and unless you agree to pay it, then we won't have any talks at all? Will they discuss the extricating, of course, of the relationship alongside the future relationship, a trade deal, for example? All these questions unanswered, but the 27 other EU countries will have a summit at some point in the next few weeks. Then negotiations can start, although of course people pointing to things like the French elections, the German elections may delay it. But the timetable is not that long. 2 years sounds like a long time, but the person in charge of the negotiations for the rest of the EU has already said he thinks that agreement needs to be made by October 2018.
Vicky Young, thank you very much. Eric Pickles, this is a big moment, whether you were in favour of it or not, of course, at the referendum. Your reaction to the fact that a date's now been sent to...
Well, it's a massive moment. I'm pleased that we're getting on with it. I think it was right that we sent the Act was unamended. But if we know anything about our dear friends in the European Union, it's a 5 to midnight organisation. So I'm not quite as confident that everything will be sorted out quite so quickly.
Yes, do you agree with Eric Pickles that it could actually be one of those marathon, in the last sort of days of the negotiation timetable, in 2 years' time, it'll be a sort of marathon talks between all sides before a deal is done?
I mean, my view is that actually over the next 2 years there's going to have to be a lot of work done, and actually now the excitement really starts in some respects, the detail. But I think at the end of the 2 years, Joe, we're probably only likely to have the headlines. I think post those 2 years there's going to be maybe 5-6 years of transitioning into every area of detail of policy, and that's why even Theresa May before now has mentioned that there may be this transition period. So I think you're right. I think there'll be a lot left to the sort of 5 to midnight, but don't think that it's going to be over in 2 years' time. I think there's going to be a lot more discussion after that for some years to come.
In terms of a little bit of reflection on the Labour side, do you think there should have been more opposition?
Look, I feel the Labour position is the right one. It's to happen to be the one that I believe in very strongly, is that we have to accept the result of the referendum. But at the same time, I think our position was right during the discussion of this bill to raise some concerns about the fact that EU nationals who are working here, paying their taxes, don't know what's going to happen to them. And I think now that we have got a date next week for the letter to be sent. I hope Theresa May will stand by her word, which is to give that particular area of policy priority.
Do you agree with Caroline Flint that it's unlikely we're going to get beyond what she calls the headline, if you like, the divorce settlement, and that actually, in terms of having a free trade deal, there will have to be interim proposals so that there isn't a cliff edge?
I don't think it's sequential. I think all those things that your reporter talked about, the eventual bill, the working out of a trade agreement, the working out about a new relationship, if it's going to be meaningful, has to take place roughly at the same time, because all three are interrelated. But I do think it is going to be very complex, and I do think it's going to take an awful lot of time. But I do think that we might not see people fully engage in this on the continent, within the European Union, until well into the autumn of this year.
All right, we'll leave it there, but that is the date that is going to fire the starting gun on the 2 years of negotiations of Britain leaving the EU. That is March the 29th, that is next Wednesday. A week on Wednesday is when Theresa May, the Prime Minister, will trigger Article 50.
Next week, on the 29th of March, to be precise, Britain will begin the official process of leaving the European Union. Theresa May will send a letter to the EU that will trigger up to 2 years of talks on the terms of Britain's exit. Ministers say it will be the most important negotiation in a generation. No country has ever taken this step before, and as Vicky Young reports, much of what happens next is uncharted territory.
She's stepping into Britain's most important negotiation for a generation. Huge uncertainty lies ahead, but during a trip to Swansea, Theresa May said her aims were clear.
Those include getting a good free trade deal. They include putting issues like our continuing working together on issues like security as at the core of what we're doing. We're going to be out there negotiating hard, delivering on what the British people voted for.
In Brussels, they've been waiting for Britain to make its move.
We are ready to begin negotiations.
The President of the European Council tweeted that he would respond swiftly next week with negotiating guidelines for the 27 countries staying in the EU. So what's the timetable ahead? Well, the formal process of triggering Article 50 will happen on March the 29th, when the Prime Minister sends a letter to Donald Tusk. Talks could then start in May or June, and negotiators have up to 2 years to try to agree a deal. Labour say the Prime Minister has failed to provide any certainty about her plans for Brexit.
Across Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland there isn't unity of purpose, and that means the prospect of crashing out of the EU without a deal is a very real prospect, and that would be highly destructive for our economy.
And the Liberal Democrats say turning our back on the EU's free trade area is a huge mistake.
The very wealthy will be fine, sadly, because they always are. Everybody else, however, is going to suffer because Theresa May has made this extreme decision to take us out of the single market, even though nobody was asked their opinion on that in the referendum.
Theresa May's government faces a monumental task, negotiating an exit deal that doesn't punish the UK, sorting out a new trade deal with the EU that won't harm British businesses. And alongside all of that, here in Parliament, numerous laws will be needed to set up new systems covering everything from immigration to fishing and farming. Ministers insisted today they're preparing for all eventualities, including leaving the EU with no deal. But they're optimistic about talks.
I think it's manifestly in the interest not just of the UK, but of the continuing European Union, that there should be a sensible resolution of our withdrawal.
This Vogue magazine fashion shoot shows a pensive Theresa May. Next week she'll embark on a much tougher assignment. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
And our Europe editor, Katja Adler, is in Brussels. Katja, we've just seen what this means for Britain. What does it mean, I wonder, in Brussels?
Well, just the mood here today has been very much a relief laced with regret. Of course, EU officials here and other EU countries really don't want the UK to leave. But since they've known that's what the UK intends to do for a very long time now, they've just wanted Britain to get on with it. Now that they have a date where the process will start, as one high-level Brussels source told me this night, they're hoping that they can downgrade Brexit, if you like, from the EU issue to just another EU issue that they have to deal with. Brussels is grateful that Theresa May didn't trigger Article 50 this week, just ahead of the EU celebrating its 60th birthday on Saturday. The mood there will be resolutely positive and upbeat, looking towards the EU future rather than the fact that one of its key members is leaving. But Brexit, of course, remains a big deal for the EU. There are worries that if Brexit goes well for the UK, that other countries might be tempted to walk out of the EU door. But don't expect negotiations to go far, at least until autumn. The EU wants to get elections in big boys Germany and France out of the way first.
Katja, thank you very much.
Now, the UK will officially notify the European Union that the UK is to leave next Wednesday, the 29th of March. That will start the clock on a 2-year countdown to Britain's actual departure from the European Union. On a visit to Wales, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, said she would negotiate hard to deliver what the British people voted for. The European Commission said it was waiting for the letter and was ready to begin. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has this.
Theresa May was in Swansea as the announcement was made that Britain will formally notify the EU of its intention to quit a week on Wednesday. That starts the 2-year clock, in which time negotiations must be finished.
We're going to be out there negotiating hard, delivering on what the British people voted for.
This is the first stop on a UK tour billed as Theresa May, giving a sense of occasion to Brexit. It was also sold as proof that the Prime Minister was listening to devolved administrations like Carwyn Jones' one in Wales. But Wales First Minister said Theresa May had a tin ear for devolution and should stop referring to Wales as a region.
Well, the unfortunate message that was given, certainly this morning, was that the UK government is not interested in the views of the other nations in the UK. I'll be pursuing that with the Prime Minister. Talk of the Joint Ministerial Council as opposed to listen to the regions. We're not a region, thanks, in Wales. And them saying that powers that come from Brussels will end up in London. We fundamentally disagree with that.
The European Commission acknowledged it had now been told when to expect the Article 50 letter.
Okay, from us guys, the reply is the following. Yes, we have been informed in advance. We are ready to begin negotiations.
Over the road in Brussels at a finance ministers' meeting, scepticism that Britain can finish its negotiations within the 2-year limit.
Doesn't sound like 2 years sounds very realistic.
Well, I never said 2 years. The questioner said 2 years in her wisdom and insight. My view is that it will take longer than that.
Brexit could make the next Queen's speech announcing planned new laws a very crowded affair, with space needed for up to 15 new acts of Parliament to replace old, discarded European laws.
There won't be the space, there'll be much less space. So basically there'll need to be ruthless prioritisation of any other bids for non-Brexit related bills. Usually get less legislation towards the end of a session anyway, but what we do have is a Prime Minister who's tried to reboot her programme mid-Parliament. So you might have expected quite a lot of other legislation to be coming through. But frankly, that might have to wait.
Theresa May has been photographed by her favourite magazine, American Vogue. Some EU leaders grumble they've been sitting around for 9 months, waiting for Britain's Brexit letter to start the process of talks. Well, about just over a week ago, there were 2 versions of that Article 50 letter still knocking around in Whitehall. One of them was about 100 pages long. The other one was about 7 pages long. And I think given Theresa May's general reputation for sharing information, we can be pretty sure it'll be the latter of those that actually pings across to Brussels a week on Wednesday. As for the timetable after that, it's slipped a bit because the date of the letter has slipped a bit and because there are elections all over Europe. So I think Europeans will want to wait until after the French presidential election before they really start chewing on this, and the serious chewing will actually have to wait until after the German elections, and we're talking about September for those. One other little nugget. One of the most neuralgic issues at the top of the agenda when they do start sitting down is the Brexit bill, the bill for leaving Britain. The European Commission talking about something in the order of around £50 billion. And one pro-Brexit cabinet minister has been going around recently telling anyone who'll listen that he thinks it shouldn't be above £2 to £3 billion. I'm not sure who'll be more cheesed off by that, Brussels or number 10.
Gary Gibbon in Westminster.
Now, 9 months ago, few of us had heard of Article 50. Some clearly wish it had stayed that way. But today it became clear that notice of our exit from the European Union will be delivered to the EU a week on Wednesday. In other words, Mrs May will have kept to her own deadline, which was due at the end of March. If by any chance the negotiations manage to stick to the 2-year timetable, the first working day for the UK outside of the EU will be April Fool's Day 2019. Bon voyage to you all, as the French probably won't say. Robert Peston assesses how it's all going.
The spinning wheel of our European fortune. We've been in for 40 years, we voted out 9 months ago, and March 29 is when we formally notify that we really are leaving.
I'm very clear that I want to ensure we get the best possible deal for the United Kingdom that works for everyone across the United Kingdom and all parts of the UK when we enter these negotiations. I've set out my objectives. Those include getting a good free trade deal. They include putting issues like our continuing working together on issues like security as at the core of what we're doing.
A huge project, of course, acknowledged by Europe's most powerful leader, Angela Merkel, who said that negotiating future relations with us was, however, no more important than strengthening links between remaining EU countries to make the EU, in her words, weatherproof. Next Wednesday, a letter from Theresa May will be delivered to the European Council in Brussels, saying the UK wishes to quit the EU. 2 days later, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, will set out broad draft guidelines for the talks. They'll have to be agreed by 27 EU leaders at a summit a month later. Then it'll take another month for EU ministers to agree a more detailed and technical mandate, after which the talks can begin in earnest, led by the UK's Brexit Minister David Davis and the EU's chief negotiator Michel Barnier. And if all goes to schedule, and many think it won't, the UK will be out of the EU by the end of March 2019. Today the Prime Minister was on the first leg of a tour of the nations of the UK, and the hope we would all row together out of the EU in perfect harmony. But discord seems more likely.
The UK government is not interested in the views of the other nations in the UK. I'll be pursuing that with the Prime Minister.
She didn't have the courtesy to let the Scottish Government know that she was announcing it today, let alone the content. Now remember, this is a Prime Minister who said that she would seek UK-wide approval and agreement.
What we hoped was that the Prime Minister would do as she said and build a national consensus about the way forward. It's in the national interest that we get the best deal. That will only happen if there's consensus.
A sombre portrait in April's edition of American Vogue of a Prime Minister whose negotiating skills will decide whether Brexit will be smooth and enriching or bumpy and impoverishing. Don't hold your breath to find out. It'll be months before we're past stultifying bureaucratic fiddling to the decisions that matter.
And Robert is here now. Stultifying bureaucratic fiddling. Is that what the first 6 months is realistically going to be like? What's it actually going to be?
Certainly the first few months, because we haven't even yet got the broad principles for the talks. We will get those after a month. Now, we hope those will include a decision, for example, about whether all the other EU leaders are prepared to talk about initially is the bill we pay them for leaving. It was they're insisting we have to pay a big bill, they say up to 60 billion euros, 50 billion quid's worth. There's absolutely no question Theresa May does not want to pay that kind of money. But she also simultaneously wants to negotiate our future relationship with the EU. Trade relationship, security relationship. We don't know whether they're going to say essentially divorce terms first and then future relationship, or whether she will get what she wants, which is simultaneous talks. The big point, though, which you obviously completely understand, is that nothing material, stuff that really matters to us, access to Europe's market, future of European Union citizens who live here, none of that can be decided until after the German elections in the autumn, because there's only one figure who really matters apart from Theresa May and all of this, Angela Merkel. Her future has to be secure. That won't be secure till after the summer.
OK, one potential consequence is this: we're discussing a Scottish referendum again, to be discussed in the Scottish Parliament tomorrow. Theresa May said to Nicola Sturgeon, you can't have it at least until after 2020. Is that a sustainable political position for the Prime Minister in your view? I know she can, but can she politically sustain it?
We don't know yet. I mean, let's be clear. The mood of Scottish people is increasingly angry with Theresa May. They feel, many of them, that she is lecturing them, hectoring them, telling them what's best for them. And although she is desperate not to be seen as Thatcher reborn, many of them do see her in that way. And you remember even now how disliked in Scotland Margaret Thatcher is. So really the challenge for Theresa May is to spend more time in Scotland, to look as though she is somebody who understands Scots' legitimate concerns. But we're a long way from that. So I think right now the likelihood is of a standoff. The Scottish Parliament voting to authorise Nicola Sturgeon, and then she would hold, possibly before the election, an unauthorised referendum, which would put Theresa May in a hugely difficult position, something close to a serious constitutional crisis.
OK, very complicated to say the least, Robert. We'll talk about it some more, I'm pretty sure, but thank you very much for now.
The day has been announced, March the 29th. Not a general election, it's not a boy, it's not a girl, it's Article 50. 279 days, when I tried to count it, after the June 23rd referendum, 9 months and a few extra days, the Brexit process begins. All the arguments, the chatter, the thinking about this option or that, it all starts then. Clear your diaries. Here's how the timetable now looks. On the day itself, Theresa May will send a letter to Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, and will address the Commons. Within 48 hours, the Council will publish its draft negotiating guidelines. Then everything is put on pause to late April, when other EU leaders are expected to meet to agree a negotiating mandate. The talks themselves should then begin sometime in May, after the final round of the French presidential election. They will go on and on through the German general election in September, probably into autumn 2018. After that, the draft deal is put to a vote in the UK and European Parliaments and the European Council. Job done. Then Brexit becomes a reality 2 years from now. Well, Victoria Dean was a diplomat for 20 years, including being the Foreign Office's Deputy Director on Europe and also spokesperson for the UK's permanent representation to the EU. She now heads the Brexit unit at Portland Communications. Very good evening. We thought we'd get you to help us understand some of the choreography of this. Can we start with their internal decision-making, the other 27? Because they're going to have a meeting late April, it seems.
That's exactly what they'll do. So they need to coordinate their position in response to the UK invoking Article 50. We expect that they will get together end of April. Rumour had it the 27th of April. I think that's quite tricky timing between the two rounds of the French election.
They have to agree a line. I mean, what happens if they can't agree on a line? Does that stall things?
It does, and it could take them more than one meeting. But of course, they have been preparing for months. They have had plenty of time to start to get their ducks in a row. And they then give a mandate to the Commission, who will lead the negotiations with the UK.
Right, so the Commission lead the negotiations. Can we divide and rule a bit here? Can we sort of bung a few favours to one lot and say, come on, be on our side on this or that?
I certainly think that's what the UK has been trying to do and probably will continue to have a go at. But there is a strong case for European Union member states to come together and to have some unity on this. And to some extent, that is Barnier's job as the Commission's lead negotiator, to try and keep the member states together as much as he can on this. They know that they'll be more successful if they're a united front.
Now, we keep talking about the negotiations of a deal. Physically, give me the picture of what we mean by negotiations. Is it Barnier? Is it David Davis? Or are we talking people lower down the food chain who will be sitting? Where will they be? What language will they be talking? Will they be? Are we talking about sort of thousands of pages of things passing backwards and forwards? What is it actually going to look like?
So none of that is set in stone, but you're right, we expect that it will be Barnier on the one side and David Davis. Those will be the kind of faces of the negotiation. There'll be quite a team behind them.
David Davis isn't going to be there every day, though, is
he? Of course he's not going to be there every day. There's quite a team behind them. And actually Barnier has already set out who his team is and has divided them into different sectors. He's got trade specialists, he's got financial services specialists. So we know a lot about his negotiating team already. I expect they'll happen in Brussels. I expect there'll be lots and lots that happens outside the room and outside the formal negotiations, because that's how Brussels works.
And the language, you didn't answer the language one. It's going to be in English, isn't it?
I think it's going to have to be in English. I don't know how Barnier will feel about that.
Right. So the first issue, they've always said, we've got a couple of things we need to work out: the citizens in different countries, and the Brexit bill. We have to just sort out where the bill. If we get stuck on that, if we don't agree that, seriously, does nothing happen for the whole 2 years while we say no, it's 32 and they say 60 or whatever?
So that's a strong possibility, and there are plenty of people who will tell you that that's what will happen, that negotiations will run into the sand over the issue of the bill and the 60 billion euros, and that we might never even get into the real meat of the negotiations themselves. I think there is a way around that. As Newsnight reported last week, in fact, that you can sort of park in a separate process between number crunchers quite what happens on the 60 billion. That's a concession on both sides already, early on, that there is a bill to be paid and that the number can be discussed elsewhere. So perhaps that is a price worth paying to allow you to get into the meat of the negotiations. Yeah. You're right that the other issue that the Prime Minister, I think, will want to tackle early is the status of EU nationals in the UK, and in return, UK nationals in the EU.
And in one word, if we agree on a status for EU nationals but don't agree on anything else, the status will stay as agreed, presumably, or does that fall away when you have no agreement on anything else?
I think we don't know for sure, because what we know is it's not agreed until it's all agreed.
Victoria, thanks very much. I dare say we'll talk to you again through this process.
Thank you.